So with in the middle of your transition, so you guys meet, you have your first conversation, you guys hit it off. What's that like? Was there back and forth saying, I think it's worth X, but you think it's worth Y? You know, how did that due diligence process go back and forth when kind of those initial discussions?
I'm sure we both remember it differently, but when we first started talking, honestly, I feel like Tyler did get it. Like he got it from the finance perspective and he understood like the valuation side of it. So I actually don't remember a ton of back and forth negotiating. Tyler could correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we had priced it at a reasonable valuation for a pretty awesome company with great social media, great products, and from what I remember, at least from the valuation side, I don't remember if there was a ton of friction. What do you remember, Tyler?
No, and I want to give a little plug to this book that I kind of used. It's Harvard Business Review Guide to Buying a Small Business. It's called Think Big and Buy Small. $10 on Amazon, probably the best read you'll ever have in the space. But as I was researching that, it said more commonly small businesses sell for a multiple around 1 times revenue or 4 times EBITDA, kind of your net operating income. So I honestly, looking at that metric and the growth that Copper Pearl was seeing, I had no issues with the valuation and the purchase price. So I actually don't even remember pushing back. In fact, we ended up closing with a higher purchase price than we had originally agreed upon, just based on how the business was scaling. So yeah, that was never really a problem in terms of getting on the same page in terms of valuation and purchase price and stuff.
I've always said if both parties are being reasonable and you've built a good business as the seller and the buyer is reasonable, you just said that you actually ended up paying more for the business than was originally agreed upon. A lot of times you build up the rapport with a buyer and a seller and they want to work together and they like each other, amazing things can happen and you can have this win-win scenario. Walk us through the transition. Day one, papers are signed, money's transferred, you're taking over, you're moving your family up to Arizona. How does that transition go? What went well? What didn't go well?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, the move was the most difficult part of this. I mean, we had a big family, so pulling kids out of schools and we decided to build a house at the same time. And so living in a rental, that was much, much harder than the business transition. The way I look at businesses, I just kind of break it down into people, process, product, and systems. And that's how I kind of analyze Copper Pearl is, do they have the right people in place? How are their processes? Do they have good products? And then ultimately kind of the infrastructure of automation and systems. And so all of those components were in place, and Joel and Cameron had really put a great team together. That was one of the most attractive things to me, is the people that they had under them. And so me, with my background, I was very process oriented. The business was already very, very process oriented, so to speak. So I would say the transition went smooth. I think one thing that we both realized early on is that we were out of stock of like 50% of our SKUs. So we had to really ramp up manufacturing and build up inventory. So that was a little bit of a challenge at the beginning, working with the factory to scale manufacturing and kind of, try to figure out what demand really was. Because I think there were so many stockouts and such, there wasn't a really true idea of like what true demand was for certain products, but product lines and SKUs and stuff. But I would say, Joel, keep me honest. I mean, we still spoke a lot, and Cameron stayed on and did some consulting with me for a year. Joel had 2 other businesses, so it was pretty busy. But we, spent, I think, at least the first month, spending a lot of time together, doing a lot of tasks and processes together. I had them write down kind of detailed procedures of how they did the more complex things. But then having Cameron stay on and consult and at least having them as a resource to ask questions whenever things came up, that was really helpful.
Remember, as we were closing the transaction, we had already built up a lot of trust and like credibility with each other. And so we did as much as we could to really support Tyler. And Tyler asked us lots of questions at the beginning. We got tons of stuff just recorded on paper in terms of processes, and I think, one of the best tips of, points of advice that I feel like from my point of view of how it went successfully is, I think that Tyler really took everything good that me and Cameron had already built and like really just locked in on that, got everything written down on paper. And then I think he did a great job focusing on, what are some other, avenues for growth? Like, how else could we scale this? Because that's, one of the big reasons we sold is we weren't necessarily ready or willing to put in that extreme effort it takes to go from, X million dollars and try to, 2x that, 3x that, 4x that. It takes a lot of extra, work and some specific stuff. So I think that's one thing I noticed, that he kind of took what we had done well and just kind of ran with it.
So I think
I'm not very creative. I mean, I can keep I'm a kind of guy who can keep the lights on. So Joel and Cameron did all the creative stuff and put all the, the thought and effort into it. And then, I was able to keep the lights on and then kind of, take my experience in business and seeing business grow and kind of take it from there.